Dr. Amery, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the nice introduction. Good afternoon. Great to be with you, and I'm certainly very, very pleased to see so many civil engineers in this room. My connection to civil engineering is through my own beloved brother, who operates in the Bekaa Valley in South Lebanon. And I myself work in engineering, essentially science and engineering school, Colorado School of Mines. And a lot of my friends, and certainly a lot of my students, are engineers, civil engineering and others. And one of the things I truly appreciate about the engineering discipline is what I, as a social scientist, refer to as the can-do attitude of engineers. It's just that we would like to sort of make engineers aware of the consequences, social, environmental, political consequences of the positive can-do attitude. What I'd like to talk to you about today is a media perspective. It's based on an article that I wrote 2 or 3 years ago about how the media covered a water crisis between Lebanon and Israel, a water crisis that almost descended to war. Okay, so this is working. So given the fact that I don't know your background and what you know about water issues, I decided to offer you a background and overview of water issues globally and in the Middle East. I'll make that fairly brief. And then I'll talk about the triggers of water war. And the reason why I will talk about the triggers of water war, because that particular crisis almost led to a water war. And so it is therefore relevant. In fact, the media-related article that I wrote is an extension of an earlier piece that I had published on water wars in the Middle East. But the media one was obviously focused on the media. And so therefore, I'll talk about how the media covered the water project in the Upper Jordan River. And the project was, in fact, inside Lebanon. The main argument was that there was so much misrepresentation by the media of the of the water tensions, that almost led to a water war between the two countries. And if you're interested, this is the article that I'm basing my talk on. Globally speaking, this region here, Middle East and North Africa, is by far the most water scarce region in the world in terms of available water on per capita basis per year. So the Middle East and North Africa is by far the most water scarce region in the world. And we can see it visually by this aerial photograph. The contrast between Southern Europe and Northern Africa is very evident. Nile Valley. As far as the Middle East and North Africa is concerned, the region contains 1%. The region contains 1% of the world's water and houses or has 5% of the world's population. A very, very important point to keep in mind, globally speaking, and very much so in the Middle East, something like 70% of all the water that the human beings use go towards agriculture. Therefore, any saving, any water saving, any water conservation in the area of agriculture will translate to a lot of water conserved, to a lot of water saved. Now, what are the causes of water stress? Why is there water stress globally and in the Middle East? Well, the one basic factor that it's the geoclimatic factor, basically the region being fairly arid to start with, and also population is expanding at a very, very rapid pace. And again, when we speak of the Middle East, just like when we speak of the US, the Middle East is a fairly large place. And when I say population explosion, I'm not talking about population explosion across the Middle East, but in some places, it's happening more than in other places. So I'm quite conscientious of of how generalizations can leave can be misconstrued. Okay, so for example, Yemen has and Palestine has a they both have very high population explosion. Turkey, Israel, and Lebanon don't. Jordan, Israel, and the occupied Palestinian territories, collectively, they receive the annual rainfall of Phoenix, Arizona. They have a combined population of 15 million, and Arizona has a population of 5 million. This is just to sort of put it in an American context that you can understand, just to give you an appreciation for how severe the water stress is. Now, in terms of rivers in the Middle East, there are the key rivers are the Nile, Jordan, Orontes, Euphrates, and Tigris. Now, south of the Euphrates and the Jordan, this entire area here, which is a huge piece of real estate, doesn't have a single permanently running river. All the water that is in this region here, it's all groundwater. And the areas that are rich in groundwater are shaded in dark green. So we see that there isn't a lot of groundwater either. Okay? So the entire Arabian Peninsula then relies almost exclusively on groundwater and increasingly on desalination. More in terms of causes of water stress, people are living longer, people's quality of life is improving, people are eating more meat, and meat production is certainly much more water intensive than vegetarian-based diet. Economies are polluting more water, freshwater sources, and by polluting freshwater sources, essentially are removing them from society's ability to tap them. So you're making it that much more difficult for society to tap them and use them. There is a fad, and I hope it's only a fad, meaning it'll go away. There's a fad in terms of countries wanting to irrigate the desert, wanting to make the desert bloom. And I say I hope it'll go away because, to my mind, it's sort of counterintuitive. It's anti-nature. And there's also something that is very counterintuitive is you would think when a resource is scarce, you would think that it will be priced appropriately in the marketplace, meaning it'll become more expensive to use and to access. In fact, what's happening with water, which is very scarce, that countries continue to offer significant subsidies for people to consume it. This picture gives you a feeling of the before and after effect of making the desert bloom. The circles here, they show the center pivot irrigation in Egypt. So this is 1999, and this is before and this is after. This is not responding. Okay, there we are. Making the desert bloom. I spent my sabbatical year some 3 years ago in the United Arab Emirates, and this is right next door to Saudi Arabia, for those of you who are not familiar with the geography of that corner of the Middle East. And something that amazed me, I was not aware of at all, is if you're in the city, in the capital city, for example, any of the cities, there's no way on earth you would think that you're in a desert state, because the city is lush green. And that's how the city looks like. This is a picture of a park in the Emirates, and all of that vegetation is irrigated. And the streets are lined by palm trees, as you see up there, but the sand dune peeks its head from behind the palm trees, as you see in the back of the picture. Okay, in terms of causes of water stress, irrigation, like I said, is by far the biggest consumer of water, and irrigation generally is very inefficient. countries are overpumping their aquifers, and by overpumping their aquifers, overpumping of an aquifer is an underground water source, of course, but overpumping it, of course, you're contaminating, you're allowing for salinity or salinization of that aquifer, and therefore perhaps removing, in some cases, removing that aquifer from human use. And this is very much, Israel has had an experience with this. Now, under conditions of water stress, are countries likely to cooperate and find solutions, or are they likely to fight it out? That is a big question, and there's a lot of debate over this. And the debate, I stand on the side of water stress or competition over scarce water resources will likely lead to violent confrontation between states. That's my position. That's not the only position that's out there, and I just want to make that clear. And that's the position I take. In terms, and I will come back to that in a second, it's really important to sort of reflect on a wise senator's comment many years ago. He said that the first principle of water policy is that rational thinking does not apply. Okay? Water is, people think of water in very, very strange ways. I taught in Canada for a long time before I moved to Colorado, and the year before I moved to Colorado, I was teaching an environmental class to my Canadian students, and I asked them, how many of you support exporting water to the US? And selling water to the US, not giving it away. And only a handful out of 30-odd students raised their hands, and almost all of the students were against selling water to the US. And I tried to get some kind of a meaningful answer from them as to why are they against selling water when they sell all kinds of other natural resources. And the best answer they could come up with is it's something that we have that they don't. People feel about, water is, my point here is that water is, people feel attached to water in ways that is different than, I don't know of anyone who's attached to timber. Now, triggers of water wars. For a water war to happen, you would have to have protracted scarcity, not sort of a one-season scarcity, scarcity over a long time. Also, water would have to be vital to the economy. Water would have to be vital to the economy. And there would have to be transboundary water courses. I'm trying to go a little bit quickly over these because I want to get to the media aspect of the presentation. You would have to have transboundary water courses. And all of those, by the way, exist in the context of the Jordan Basin, which I'm interested in here. And the no formal water allocation treaty, and that is very much the case in the Jordan Basin. Animosities and land disputes, it's there. Unilateral water development, one side, one party, one riparian, one country that shares a country that shares a water system is known as a riparian. One riparian developing the water system unilaterally alone without the consent of the other. And you don't have to have all these stressors of war that trigger war. They don't all have to exist at the same time for war to happen. And incidentally, when I said I stand on the side of water scarcity leading, competition over water scarcity would lead to war, I don't mean that that would happen every time. Most conflicts, most tensions over water would be resolved peacefully, but under certain circumstances that I outlined here, you're more likely to, conflict over scarcity would likely lead to war. And Kofi Annan, the UN Security Secretary General, spoke to a geography conference in 2001 in New York City, and he said then that fierce competition for fresh water may well become a source of conflict and wars in the future. Environmental concerns are the national security issues of the future. And there are there's a long list of leading personalities that I quote in my paper. I'm not going to bore you with all of them, but I just decided to use Anand's quote and the director of the United Nations Environmental Programs quote to highlight my point. Essentially, they both agree that water scarcity is an issue of national security. Now to the case study. Now that I provided the background to global water issues and just how water scarcity may well lead to competition of water scarcity may well lead to war under certain circumstances, I'm going to highlight a project on the upper Jordan River that almost led to war a few years ago, and how the media, in my mind, mishandled that coverage, thereby fanning hydro tensions or water tensions in that basin. Actually, the projection looks better than what I see on the screen, so I'm glad that's the case. Okay, this is the Jordan River basin, and the light shaded color is the extent of the basin. The basin is shared by Lebanon, Syria, Israel, Jordan, and the Palestinian Authority. This is a schematic diagram of the basin. These 1, 2, 3 tributaries, they feed the Jordan River north of the Sea of Galilee or Lake Tiberias. And the spring that I'm talking about today is the Wazani Spring, which feeds the larger river, the Hasbani, and again the Banias, Hasbani, and the Dan are tributaries that feed the Jordan, the main Jordan River up here. Then you have Lake Tiberias or Sea of Galilee. Somebody noticed, is there a mistake here? Lake or sea? Is that, which way is it? It's a freshwater lake.
In English translations of the New Testament, conventionally, historically, it was called sea.
But it's a freshwater lake, right?
I didn't translate.
Okay, it's a freshwater lake. It's not connected to a sea, and so what makes a sea and a lake? And if it's a freshwater, could it be that does God make mistakes, or the translators made a mistake? I gather you had a guest speaker who spoke about translations. Okay, then you have the Yarmouk, which is a major tributary, and then the Jordan River dies, I guess, in the Dead Sea. It ends in the Dead Sea. This is if you're interested in statistics, given the presence of engineers, this is the breakdown of water flow in each tributary. For example, the Dan, which rises in Israel, has an average annual flow of 250 million cubic meters per year. And the Yarmouk, which is, like I said, the largest tributary, contributes something like up to 500 million cubic meters of water per year. The Jordan River is something like 360 kilometers long, and the area of the basin is over 18,000 square kilometers. It's shared by a few entities, and incidentally, as a footnote, it's not important to us here, but as a footnote, the more countries share a river basin, the harder it becomes for the countries to agree on a water allocation plan. The Hasbani is a tributary of the Jordan, and the Wazani is a tributary of the Hasbani. This is a close-up of what I was showing you earlier. This is the Hasbani, and the Wazani is a small little spring in here, and that's the one I'm going to be talking about. So what was the issue that almost resulted in a water war between Lebanon and Israel? The issue was a water extraction project from the Wazani Spring by Lebanon. Why the water extraction project? Well, to supply water to the few impoverished villages in the border area, and the border area close to Israel, or southern Lebanon close to Israel, is an area that had experienced a lot of war and instability for a long, long time. and to try and bring the people back to this newly liberated security zone, once Israel's security zone. The Lebanese government felt that they had to, have running water in homes and things like that, and that was the idea behind the project. The project was cost the government just over $3 million, and it was to, the government is pumping 10,000 cubic meters of water from that project a day, from the Wazani. And despite the small scale of the project, it triggered, I'm quoting the paper here, it triggered much fury in the media and in political circles in Israel and drew much international media coverage. Okay, the war of words became so inflammatory that the United States and other Western governments, in fact, intervened and tried to mediate a resolution to this conflict. This is the zone that was occupied by Israel for a long time, and it was liberated in 2000, and that's the area here where the Lebanese government was trying to create some development projects so to attract the citizens back to this once war-torn strip of land. So again, this area here is now in Lebanese hands. After they learned about the project, the Israeli media and a few national figures in Israel and governmental officials, they immediately cultivated a certain public hysteria about the project. Again, water is not a very rational resource. An Israeli minister said that the Wazani project cannot be allowed to pass without a reaction from Israel. The media coverage in Israel oscillated between belligerency, and concern. It ranged from dismissive cynicism. For example, one media outlet said, "What does Lebanon want from this project?" To intimidation and threats. Lebanon is now targeting Israel with water rather than guns, one Israeli newspaper, the Jerusalem Post, wrote in an editorial. The Israelis accused Lebanon of opening a new front. This is after Israel had left South Lebanon. So the Israelis accused Lebanon of opening a new front against Israel, which is no less dangerous than the threat to the north, to northern Israel, posed by Hezbollah's Katyushas and other rockets. So water extraction from this small spring is no less dangerous than firing Katyushas at Israel. This is what an Israeli paper, the Jerusalem Post, wrote. The Jerusalem Post also wrote that this project would allow Lebanon to increase its withdrawal from the Hasbani by 28% and went as far as to put the project in quasi-existential terms. By stating that the Hasbani is an important part of the daily existence of Israelis. In other words, if you turn it off, if you reduce it, then you would somehow affect the existence of Israelis. You would note here that the paper referred to the percent increase. The percent increase ignores current levels. Lebanon had not had, the official Lebanese government had not had any access to South Lebanon for over 30 years because it was under Israeli occupation and things like that. So Lebanon had not been developing any of these water sources. Lebanon has not been using any of these water sources. So Lebanon now withdraws from both the Hasbani and the Wazani a total of 5 to 7 million cubic meters of water per year, which is a small fraction of what Lebanon is allowed under the American brokered Johnson agreement. The Israeli Prime Minister at the time, Ariel Sharon, said that Israel will not stand idly by and allow, and he said that this water theft is a cause for war. I'm quoting the exact words that the Prime Minister said. Now, given this, one would get the impression we're talking about a massive project. We're talking about massive water diversion in a way that will threaten the existence of another population. water from these tributaries, from the Hasbani and Wazani, are important to the daily existence of Israelis, implies that Lebanon's project could inflict serious harm on the Israelis. The fact is that water is of much greater importance to Lebanon because Lebanon's economy, remember what I said earlier, one of the triggers of war is if an economy is heavily dependent on water, meaning if the agricultural sector is quite strong in the economy. And in Lebanon's economy is much more dependent on agriculture than Israel's economy is. And certainly South Lebanon, the impoverished South Lebanon, is much, much more dependent on irrigation and agriculture and farming than Israel. So the fact that the Lebanese would be much more adversely affected if the river was to, if they were not allowed to tap the Wazani spring. The media coverage militarized the solution to the Arab Diversion Plan, the coverage of the 2001-2002 project militarized the solution to this particular problem, and by invoking an older diversion plan, which is the Arab Diversion Plan of 1964. In 1964, the Arab world, the leaders of the Arab world got together and they decided that one way to pressure Israel to withdraw from occupied territories is to divert the upper Jordan away from Israel. So that was agreed to by Arab leaders, and they tried to implement this in Lebanon. The diversion project started in Lebanon in 1964, and within minutes or hours, the Israeli jets were in the sky and they destroyed the bulldozers that were trying to move dirt to realize that diversion project. So in 2001, 2002, the Israeli and some Western media outlets invoked this 1964 diversion plan, and they essentially said that the two plans, the two diversions, the current one and the older one, are essentially two and the same. And Israel, incidentally, some Israeli officials said that what Lebanon is doing, in fact, on the upper Jordan is not a small diversion plan, a small water project, but more of Lebanon is planning to build a dam. Keep in mind that Lebanon had, through the UN offices, had submitted to them, to the Israelis, through the UN offices, submitted to the Israelis, detailed plans of what they were planning to do. And dam was not in the paperwork. What the journalists did not account for in 2001, 2002 is that in the 1960s, there was a collective effort by the Arab world, right? As opposed to, currently in 2001, 2002, there was an individual effort by Lebanon. So there was a collective effort and there was an acrimonious atmosphere in the 1960s. And also you had the larger region was very heavily polarized between, between pro-West and pro-East, pro-communist and pro-capitalist states. So that polarization is no more, and so the political realities of the present are very different than the Cold War era. And the project that we're talking about here in 2001 is a fairly small project to help a few villages, as opposed to a major diversion of a tributary. And I believe, had the media used different wording, had they used water abstraction project, for example, as opposed to water diversion project, that may have helped to calm down the emotions that were running quite high. So, I would argue that they used the wrong terms in describing the project. Then the story began to implode when UNIFIL is the United Nations Interim Forces in Lebanon. They've been in Lebanon since 1978, and their job is to keep an eye on essentially what's going on. Their mandate was changed recently, and now they have the authority to fire at under certain circumstances, which they were not allowed to before. So a UNIFIL spokesman said that you don't divert a river with a pipe so small. And then Lebanon denied that it's building any dams, and they assassinated the Prime Minister of Lebanon, Rafiq al-Hariri, who was Prime Minister at the time. He said, we asked the UN, the US, and the EU, basically we asked the international community to help us in defining the quantity of water that Lebanon can obtain from the Wazani. He also rejected the notion of water war. In other words, he said, we're not interested, that's not the course that we are taking, and we just simply want to develop southern Lebanon. And in case you're interested in how the spring looks like, in 2003, I had a chance to visit it. This is the spring in the winter. In the summertime, it may not be running, incidentally, or it's significantly smaller. And this is the water abstraction project. Okay, pretty menacing, right? Hydrotensions dragged on for a few months until international mediators, especially the US, intervened. The US has a long history of intervening to mediate water conflicts in the Middle East. In the 1950s, President Eisenhower sent a special envoy by the name of Eric Johnson to help the Arabs and the Israelis work out their water differences. They, in fact, developed a water allocation plan for the Jordan River Basin. Water allocation plan meaning they agreed as to who should get how much of the Jordan River waters. And although that plan was arrived at with the consent of all the riparians, all the parties on the river basin, it was never ratified by the governments, because ratifying it would be an acknowledgement of the State of Israel, despite the fact that the water allocation agreement was not ratified. It continues to serve as the context for who gets how much, who should get how much from the Jordan River Basin. So it's sort of the official but unofficial document that everyone seems to refer to. The Johnson allocation plan gave Jordan 52% of water flow in the Jordan, Israel 30%, Syria 9%, and Lebanon 3%. The 3% would amount to 35 million cubic meters of water for Lebanon, and Lebanon is currently taking less than 10 million cubic meters of water from the Jordan. And Lebanon is underusing then its allocated share, primarily because the South was in such turmoil for such a long time. A comment about American mediation in 2002, the first flare-up in southern Lebanon between Lebanon and Israel was in 2001. And the US was not too quick to intervene to try and mediate that particular conflict. They were much more interested in mediating the conflict when it flared up again in 2002. Why was that? They wanted to sort of put things under control in the Middle East, to sort of have the Middle East sort of as quiet as possible before the Iraq War was to start. So the US was interested, they didn't want to have side wars when there was a big war that was being planned in 2003. In terms of summary and conclusions, Israel's reaction to the water project was the following. Israel's defense ministry expressed concern that Lebanon could eventually build a dam to divert the entire river. And so I think of that sort of mindset. I understand this sort of mindset in the context of the history that the two countries have between each other, and a history that is loaded with immense distrust, mutual distrust. The Israeli Prime Minister said that the pumping station is the start of a major diversion effort. Again, I call that, that's another sign of distrust. Israel said that the pump amounted to Lebanon opening a new front against it, and that's a military discourse which dominates the thinking of, unfortunately, far too many people in the Middle East, Israelis and Arabs. An Israeli reporter wrote, the conflict over water is potentially almost as incendiary as the quandary over Jerusalem. Now, if you follow Middle East politics, that is a very fabulous statement. I mean, nothing moves people like issues of religion, and nothing moves people who care about, the people from the Abrahamic faiths, nothing moves them like Jerusalem to sort of equate the conflict over water to the passion that Jerusalem moves people I think it's quite accurate. The coverage described the water abstraction project as menacing to one side, and therefore what was lacking is that there wasn't much discussion of the need of the southern Lebanese to abstract sufficient water to meet their own needs. In arid regions, water is viewed in existential terms, and that's sort of an effort, this statement is an effort to try and get a grip on what I refer to as the irrationality of how water is perceived. Reaction to the Wazani water crisis was passionate and irrational. The upward spiraling, irrational because there wasn't much there, right? It wasn't such a big story. It wasn't such a there wasn't such a huge issue, but a huge issue. I mean, the media was a major culprit in fanning the flames of hydro tensions. Upward spiraling of water tensions will sometimes veer riparians to the brink of war and perhaps to war itself. Reporters seemed unaware of the sensitivity of water politics and relied on shaky historical analogies, and that temporarily militarized the solution of the crisis. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.